The title of my talk is Overcoming Fatherlessness Through the Fatherhood of God. Now, before I get into my talk, I just want to mention that I'm going to be talking about God and Christianity. Now, some people have suggested to me that I should not talk about God, and we certainly don't hear about him in the context of the secular men's movement. However, I think extending the narrative to include questions of God and religion is something which it's necessary to do. Let me explain why. I'm going to be talking about issues of fatherhood and family. Now, once upon a time, it would have been quite normal to bring questions of God and faith into discussions of the family. Faith and religion have always been at the heart of organising family life. But Marxism and feminism put paid to that. Marxism had as a primary goal the destruction of Christianity, and the feminists, with their profound hostility to patriarchy, carried on the Marxists' anti-Christian work. As a result of Marxism and feminism, Christianity has been completely expunged from the public platform. Christians themselves are regarded as a weird irrelevance to society, and those with power attempt to restrict our Christian belief to the four walls of what is sometimes a corrupted church. By restricting questions of God and religion to the private realm, feminists have maintained a control of the narrative. By talking about God and religion, this is something which I intend to subvert. Okay, now to the main substance of my talk. We all know that one of the primary goals of feminism has been to drive fathers out of families, and they've been very successful in this goal. The strategies they've used have been varied and wide. One of the strategies which has winkled fathers out is through the destruction of marriage, which was a purposeful and intentional goal. So, for example, Baroness Hale, in her early days when she was just plain old Mrs. Hoggart, explained that family law no longer makes any attempt to buttress the stability of marriage or any other union. Therefore, she suggested that rather than discussing which remedies should be extended to the unmarried, we should now be considering whether the legal institution of marriage continues to serve any useful purpose. Carol Smart concluded that it didn't, and in 1984 she identified various ways in which marriage could be destroyed. I'll read from her policy document. It would be far more effective to undermine the social and legal need and support for the marriage contract. It would be more effective to do that than just simply destroy marriage. This could be achieved by withdrawing the privileges which are currently extended to the married heterosexual couple. Such a move would not entail any punitive sanctions, but would simply extend legal recognition to different types of households and relationships, and would end such privileges as the unjustified marriage tax allowance. Illegitimacy would be abolished by realising the right of all women, whether married or single, to give legitimacy to their children. Welfare benefits and tax allowances would also need to be assessed on the basis of individual need or contribution and not on the basis of the family unit. This appears to have provided a template through which marriage has been destroyed. So, for example, in 1989, Baroness Hale declared that the rule of law that the father is the natural guardian of his legitimate child is abolished. This meant it was straightforward for a mother to exclude the father from the life of their child simply by leaving him off the birth certificate. And in keeping with Carol Smart's financial suggestions, financial motivations were created to leave the father out. So, for example, we see an extensive system of tax benefits and credits which has been set up to ensure that the mother can survive often more comfortably with her children if she actually gets rid of the children's father. Even when a man is working, the mother of his children will not necessarily be worse off if she decides to go it alone. And while, of course, many mothers do still stay in a clandestine relationship with the fathers, this enables them to have more children and get the financial benefits. If you have to pretend that you're not together, this will invariably put a relationship under threat. The devaluing of the male contribution to the family has also been ensured through changes to male employment. There is nothing more conducive to marriage than stable male employment or an increase in the male wage. However, feminists have put a huge amount of effort into devaluing the male wage. The most obvious way of doing this has been to doggedly increase female wages, which is why they keep harping on about the gender wage gap. This is not so much about equal wages, which we have, but about ensuring that women can earn lots of money so that they can survive independently of men. At the same time, the education system has been designed around the female pupil, which has had a massively detrimental impact on the performance of boys. Perhaps the increasingly poorly qualified male accounts for the fact that young women can earn the same as men or more than until they have children, at which point they may decide to take more time off work and the gender wage gap starts to emerge. Carol Smart foresaw how legitimising different types of relationship would also serve to undermine the integrity of marriage, and she was right. So, for example, same-sex marriage does not require monogamy, nor does it even require sexual consummation, and therefore it changes at a very fundamental level what marriage is all about. And in addition to this, we've got the BBC website is also already talking about polyamory, and I'm sure polygamy will soon follow down the line. Marriage is the relationship in which fathers are most likely to be able to maintain contact with their children. So when we undermine marriage, fatherhood is also undermined. And of course, where women marry each other, we find an institution which legitimises children growing up without any knowledge or idea of the father who made them. Alternatively, where a child is brought up by two men, this will erode the distinction between mothers and fathers and erode the concepts of husband and wife. In doing so, gay parenthood contributes to a gradual erosion of the distinctions between women and men. And of course, civil unions provide a way of organising or circumventing marriage completely, so that if there are any advantages to being married, you can obtain these without actually making any commitment to the institution of marriage itself. No-fault divorce has also been a very effective tool for the destruction of marriage. It existed for a long time in the US, but this year it finally emerged legally in the UK. Our no-fault divorce law has made divorce so quick and straightforward that it has entirely undermined the contractual nature of marriage, so that unless you have religious convictions, marriage becomes pointless in itself. To read from an ad I saw online, no-fault divorce for £37, fast and affordable online divorce at www.quickiedivorce.com. Perhaps even worse than divorce itself are the alimony laws, which can leave men burdened with providing for women and children who they're not even allowed to see. Marriage has moved from being a contract in which two people will love and cherish each other despite all the hurdles. It's been turned into a very high risk for men. The position of the father in the family has also been weakened by domestic abuse laws and legal aid funding, which make it easy to exclude the father from the children's lives. Child custody arrangements have also been set up in a way which leaves the father all too often at the mercy of the mother's lack of integrity or whim. But fatherhood hasn't only been destroyed by getting the father out of the family. Even when fathers are in families, they're often not allowed to practice fatherhood itself. For example, Instead of being able to father, all too often men are simply expected to take over the role of the mother in order to enable her to go out to work. If fathers are relegated to simply being another carer, or if fathers are simply expected to take over the role of the mother, then fatherhood becomes modelled around motherhood, and then the true meaning of the father is lost. Also, as Warren Farrell describes in his book, The Boy Crisis, the way a father interacts with his children is often quite strongly controlled by the mother, who takes it upon herself to tell the father how he should behave in relation to the children. We see this sometimes in the relationships around us. Fathers are prevented from giving their children boundaries or exercising discipline because they are overruled by the mothers who prefer a nicey-nicey approach. And mothers are able to assert their will because the position of the male in family life is marginal and secondary. As a result of feminist policies and ideology, women hold much more power in the family than men do. This was described by Anne-Marie Slaughter, who wrote in her article, which called for a men's movement. She wrote, women are hypocrites this way because we would go crazy if men treated us in the workforce the way we typically treat them at home. If a guy in the workforce assumed he was more competent than you are and told you what to do, but that's the way most women treat men in the household. The domestic power of women was confirmed by the Pew Research Centre, which showed how in 4 key decision-making areas, women had the final say. These areas were big home purchases, household finance, and what to watch on TV. Weekend activities, big home purchases, household finance, and what to watch on TV. As Farrell explains, most people know from experience that women still run the home even when men financially support it. Finally, there is a whole underpinning ideology which appears designed to disempower and break men. For example, we are entirely guided by the ideology of tabula rasa, which sees men and women as blank entities on which society inscribes ways of being. This underpins the feminist belief that masculinity has been constructed by an evil patriarchy, which aims to oppress and dominate women. So the feminist final solution has been to do everything they can to demolish masculinity and reshape masculinity in women's image with psychological traits and behaviours preferred by feminists. So men are increasingly shaped in the image of women rather than men. This has the effect not just of destroying masculinity, but destroying the precious differences between men and women. This was most forcefully demonstrated by the American Psychological Association's work on men, which utterly condemned masculinity and instructed therapists on how to change and alter masculinity in men. Further, any manly masculine qualities such as competitiveness, emotional resilience, endurance, assertiveness, the ability to work very long hours, masculine ways of using language, the pursuit of what is hard, all these things are utterly discouraged and reviled by the ideology of toxic masculinity. This ideology of toxic masculinity is simply the feminists' weapon to emasculate men. And what Frank Furedi calls the therapy culture encourages men and women to dwell on their emotions and their vulnerabilities and obsess about themselves in a way which is effeminate. This is another arm of what is essentially a feminist agenda which has been forced on men. It is hard to see how men can be fathers if they're not even allowed to be men. Now, I just want to talk a bit about the feminist belief in patriarchy. The justification for the almost total destruction of manhood and fatherhood is the feminist belief in patriarchy. Their belief in patriarchy underpins their destruction of marriage and masculinity and everything which props up fatherhood. Because ultimately, it is only by destroying fatherhood that patriarchy can really be overthrown. The feminists describe patriarchy in a range of ways. So we have patriarchy is a society controlled by men in which they use power to their own advantage, or a social system in which power is held by men through cultural norms and customs that favour men and withhold opportunity from women, or a system of social structures and practices in which men dominate, oppress and exploit women. These are all feminist descriptions of patriarchy. However, they do not bear a relationship to actual patriarchy. Rather, they are used by feminists as justifications for expunging patriarchy from public life. This feminist definition of patriarchy has legitimised the rendering asunder of our society in the most profoundly destructive and detrimental ways. Because patriarchy is understood as something evil, every single one of our traditional legal, social or cultural institutions, which emerged out of an essentially Christian heritage, has been ripped apart and replaced by an institution which is born of a secular feminist faith. So, for example, the idea of chastity before marriage has been replaced by complete sexual incontinence. Marriage has been replaced by cohabitation and what Isabel Sawhill calls the family merry-go-round. The gendered division of labour has been replaced by totally interchangeable roles. The male as provider has been rendered invisible as provisioning is now mediated by the state. Children no longer belong to parents but are the wards of state. The concern for the family has been replaced by a concern for the individual. And the father as head of the family has been replaced by father as optional extra. And all of this was done because feminists believed society was patriarchal, and anything which had the mark of patriarchy or shored it up in any way had to be totally and utterly destroyed. However, the problem does not lie with the feminist belief in patriarchy. The problem lies in the fact that feminists got their understanding of patriarchy completely and utterly wrong. Because, as I am going to show, real patriarchy, healthy and ideal patriarchy, coexists with essential equality. It works in the interests of everybody, and it is essentially a very good thing. However, the feminist version of patriarchy has never been challenged. In fact, in our constant denial of the existence of patriarchy, we have colluded with the feminist definition of patriarchy. The feminist version of patriarchy has never been questioned, only confirmed. And this is very serious because it is this feminist definition of patriarchy which has justified all the damage committed by feminists. So what I want to argue is that it is not the existence of patriarchy which should be challenged. It is the definition and interpretation of patriarchy which feminists have used. To a social anthropologist such as myself, patriarchy simply alludes to the social structure, the hierarchical organisation of society where men are more likely to be in public positions of power. But anthropologists who have studied a wide range of societies know that having men in public positions of power is simply theatre. It doesn't actually say much about where real power lies. And we can see the hidden social archaeology of patriarchy in our own society. in the tendency towards male politicians, or the fact that most board members of companies are men, or that men are more likely to be present in the higher echelons of the church. All this is patriarchy. In this sense, the feminists are right. However, none of this oppresses and subordinates women. And as I want to show you, patriarchy, properly understood, is a very good thing. Now, I want to talk about patriarchy properly understood. If we want to understand patriarchy properly and why it works so beautifully, we need to turn to Christianity, which is a deeply, profoundly and beautifully patriarchal faith. There is much evidence of patriarchy in Christianity. So, for example, when we are introduced to characters in the Bible, we learn of male lineages. Jediah, the son of Joarib, Jachin, Sariah, son of Hilkiah, the son of Meshullam, the son of Zadok, the son of Meraioth, the son of Ahitub, and on and on and on. We learn about the great patriarchs and how blessings were passed from father to son. When we are introduced to Jesus, his ancestry is traced from father to son through 42 generations, all the way back to Abraham himself. There is a glorious scene in the New Testament where Jesus appears with Elijah and Moses, and God's voice is heard saying, "This is my son, whom I love. Listen to him." What could be more patriarchal than that? However, all of this seems to be just scene setting for the cornerstone of Christianity, which is the fatherhood of God himself. So Christianity is deeply patriarchal, and feminists have used this as an excuse to try to destroy Christianity. For example, feminist theologians explain, "The fatherhood of God has been used to justify patriarchy, which sacralizes male domination and legitimizes virtually all forms of oppression of the weak by the strong, to deny the likeness of women to God and to Christ and to exclude them," or that the church's historical use of exclusively male language for God is so entangled with the entire patriarchal structure of the church and society that both must be entirely remade. The feminist hostility to the church is perhaps most graphically represented in the film Wonder Woman, where Wonder Woman turns herself into a sort of Amazonian missile and hurtles and destroys a church steeple. However, the feminist understanding of patriarchy has been a hideous travesty of patriarchy itself. Where to begin? I'll start with the Holy Trinity and the Christian belief in the triune God. The Holy Trinity is made up of God the Father, his Son Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. All three possess a fully and eternally divine nature, and they are all equal in their divinity. Yet their roles and relationships are different. For example, God the Father is the supreme authority, and his Son Jesus fully acknowledges his full dependency on God the Father. He says, for example, "Very truly I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can only do what he sees the Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does." For his dependency and loyalty, Jesus is most amply rewarded. We learn that the Father loves the Son and shows him all that he does, and that the Father judges no one, but has entrusted all judgment to the Son, and he does this so that all may honour the Son, just as they honour the Father. So we have God saying, "If you love me, you will love my Son, and if you don't love my Son, you don't love me." There is this total loyalty by the Father towards his Son. Then we add into that the Holy Spirit, who is structurally under both God the Father and his Son Jesus. Yet the Holy Spirit delights in serving and glorifying the Father and the Son, and at the same time can speak with the authority of God and is utterly equal to the Father and Son. Now, at one level, we can see Jesus and God the Father as an idealised father-son relationship, but it is also so much more. What we have is an inviolable and eternal authority and submission structure, the sort that feminists so terribly hate. But at the same time, every person in the Trinity is totally and utterly equal, while at the same time being happy to serve. Another way in which the Trinity is often conceptualized is as lover, God, beloved Jesus, and love, the Holy Spirit. This is what real patriarchy is about, and it transforms the potential for domination and subordination into a triangular relationship based on harmony and love. And if we transpose this relationship to the family, we can see it works out very well. What it suggests is that one can have structures of authority, but that all members of a family are equal in value and dignity and worth. Everybody should be treated as someone created in the image of God. And there are many other checks and balances in this Christian version of patriarchy to ensure that what looks like hierarchy from one angle, when looked at from another angle, is actually nothing of the sort. For throughout the Bible and Christian teaching is the way that we must make ourselves the lowliest of people if we want to make it to the highest place, which for Christians is the kingdom of God. As Jesus explains, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Or, he says, many who are first will be last, and many who are last will be first. Or, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. There is also an injunction in the New Testament to call no man father, master, or rabbi. What this passage basically means is that we shouldn't elevate people onto pedestals, and we should always be wary of those who seek power to be seen. God gives his power and mediates his fatherhood to those who seek to serve. So we see that patriarchy, which feminists have been so assiduously demolishing, provides a way of ordering society which facilitates equality between women and men. In fact, in our own society, it is only with feminism, which is essentially a product of Marxism, that brutal, uncompromising hierarchies based on single value systems really start to emerge. So, for example, the feminist obsession with wages implies a hierarchy where what a person earns becomes a marker for assessing their value and status in life. Or the importance which feminists attach to public political status implies that an individual's worth and value is determined by their status and position rather than being intrinsic to themselves. And the creation of protected characteristics places everybody in a hierarchy according to ascribed characteristics. The feminist ultimate solution would be a hierarchy where status and resources were awarded on the basis of ascribed characteristics, the most fundamental of which would be the possession of the female sex. Thus, feminists are in danger of destroying a functional, flexible, creative and just way of organising society and replacing it with a far more rigid, exclusive and dysfunctional hierarchical system which is not amenable to change. This must not be allowed to happen. Now, I have talked about the Christian understanding of patriarchy. Now I'm going to talk about how does this all tie in with creating fatherhood out of fatherless men. Having established that Christian patriarchy is actually a very good thing, I'm going to show you how it plays a vital role in creating fatherhood in fatherless men. People who look at Christianity from the outside might think it's all about taking the human concept of father and applying it to God. And they might expect that this would be a bit of a problem for fatherless people. But actually, what God does is much more profound. In fact, if we look at how God reveals himself chronologically through the Bible, it works the other way round. At the beginning, you have God, and you learn through the Bible about all his amazing roles, such as an authority, creator, protector, provider, teacher and redeemer, and many other things. And you also discover all his amazing personal qualities, such as being reliable, patient, merciful, all-seeing, all-knowing, sometimes punitive, while being charitable and the source of all love. Then the Old Testament reveals that this God, with all his roles and qualities, is God the Father. But at this stage, he is presented as Father in a rather distant and abstract sort of a way. This is profoundly changed in the New Testament with the birth of Jesus. For Jesus persistently and perpetually refers to God as his Father and teaches us to refer to God as our Father. And when Jesus teaches us this, he's not using the formal word for father, but the common Aramaic word Abba, which a child would use to address his father. It means daddy, but with more reverence. What happens at this moment when man learns that God is his father is nothing short of revolutionary. I think back to what Warren Farrell says in his book. The desire to be a father begins in his son, who sees in his own dad who he could become. When man learns that God is his father, he is presented with a model of the qualities he should have and the sorts of things which he should do when he becomes a father. When a man learns the qualities required for fatherhood, this also helps him to understand the requirements of being a man. In this way, God's fatherhood is able to generate fatherhood and therefore manhood in improperly fathered or fatherless men. So when God tells men he is their father, it becomes incumbent on men to take responsibility for others in the same way that God does, through their own fatherhood. And when God tells men he is their father, men are encouraged to manifest in their fatherhood the same sorts of qualities which they see manifest in God. And it is the requirements of fatherhood which shape what it means to be a man. What we see happening is that just as women, as mothers, are called to serve God by giving birth to God's physical, biological creations, sons and daughters, men are called to serve God by trying in their own inadequate way to imitate the qualities of God, but to do so in their own family. When God encourages men in this way, it has an incredibly beneficial effect on society as a whole. For as Jeff Dench points out, some of the essential characteristics attributed to God are sometimes found in short supply in men. For example, if we think of someone who is all-seeing, ever vigilant, eternally patient, it is a traditional mother that comes to mind. The image of a father conjured up by God is the sort of man that most women would like to have in their families as their fathers, their husbands or sons. Men who are strong, who can hold their own among other men, but who are also caring and responsive and can be called upon and relied upon. This is what patriarchy makes of men. And it is this which feminists have, with their hatred of patriarchy, been so keen to destroy. I have something else to say. Fatherhood, as we understand it, that is, fathers who have a unique parental role which differs distinctly from the role of the mother, do not exist in nature. Fathers, as beings who have a particular relationship to their children and to their children's mother, are a human social invention. It is fatherhood which makes human beings a distinctive creation. And it is only with patriarchy that fatherhood emerged. So when feminists try to get rid of fathers in order to destroy patriarchy, they don't just destroy patriarchy. They destroy fatherhood and ultimately humanity itself. And this is why we must not be complicit in the feminists' desire to dismantle patriarchy. Rather, we should defend it, albeit, as I have outlined, in its egalitarian and harmonious Christian form. I just want to explain some of the practical ways in which patriarchy is essential to fatherhood. 3 easily identifiable characteristics of fatherhood are procreation, protection, and provisioning. All of these require men to have an edge when it comes to accessing certain forms of power, publicly available status and resources. This is what patriarchy is about. So, for example, studies of female mate selection show that women select men who have more resources or authority than themselves. Not only that, research suggests that man's earnings in relation to his wife can influence his capacity to perform sexually. In fact, I would go so far as to hypothesize that the decline in sexual activity between men and women, which has been documented in our society, could be linked to the increase in status and earnings of women in relation to men. Therefore, procreation itself is dependent on men having slightly more access to publicly available status and resources, which is a characteristic of patriarchy. Likewise, male provisioning is particularly important because human infants take so long to both mature physically and in terms of acquiring culture and being socialised. And while some anthropologists are keen to point to the provisioning roles of female relatives, such as aunts and grandmothers, other research shows that the provisioning role of non-maternal females is only adequately performed when the father of the infant is around. Now, for men to play this provisioning role, they need to have the edge when it comes to accessing resources, i.e., by giving men a slightly stronger position in the public realm, men will be better able to provide. Therefore, we should pay particular attention to the employment and education of men. Finally, while in traditional societies protection depends on physical strength and stamina, in modern societies protection requires other things as well. So, for example, in order to protect his family, men require social networks, knowledge, and the ability to garner resources, knowledge of the workings of the economy, or knowledge of the government agenda, or even the workings of nature. All these things will help a man to protect. This protective role will be facilitated when men have a greater fluency and understanding of the public realm and the world outside the home. And it is patriarchal structures which give men this greater understanding of the public realm. Therefore, patriarchy, as I have described it, is absolutely essential to society. It is only through fatherhood that men can have an as equal and as vital a place as women in the family. And it is only where society has a patriarchal structure that it can enable men to perform this equal fatherly role. It is only by believing that they have that ultimate responsibility for the spiritual and material well-being of their families that men will have the toughness and resilience and endurance required to make sacrifices for their family, which both women and men should make. Christianity did not invent patriarchy. However, it's only with Christianity that we get patriarchy in not just a benign, but a creative, nurturing, protective and beneficial form. It is only with Christianity that we have a patriarchy which allows for equality within hierarchy, authority without domination, service without servitude, and love without sentimentality. It is only Christian patriarchy which creates interdependence out of independence and raises up those who are invisible and enables leaders to lead from the back. For the past 3 generations, feminists have been engaged in destroying this patriarchy. And this has pushed men out of the family, out of the workplace, and out of society. There is no place left for men. Insofar as we've simply denied the existence of patriarchy, we have been complicit in its destruction. And by denying the existence of patriarchy, we have effectively allowed feminists to define the narrative and the terms of the argument. What I have tried to show here is that patriarchy, Christian patriarchy as we had in the West, strives towards a perfect way of organising society. It is time we stopped arguing with feminists about the existence of patriarchy. Instead of denying its existence, we should seek it out and embrace it. Because if we want to get rid of feminism, then it is time to bring Christian patriarchy back. Thank you.